Because Jimba also Deshigatsa.
Okay. That means Dusre. That today Sheba. Santa Sheba, Roa. Lisa, Tamando, don't you talk each other? And that Sheba Lagore, something do not think said, Unicudea, Kumba Tasha Bajaguara.
Oh,
Lisa, Sheba Lagore. There are too much Zimbala. Yeah.
Okay. In that case, well, we've got the mind of enlightenment, and then we've got the bodhisattva deeds, which include the 6 perfections, right? So you need to cultivate the mind of enlightenment and train in the bodhisattva deeds. To achieve enlightenment, you must train in the bodhisattva deeds. You cannot achieve enlightenment without doing so. The first of these is the perfection of generosity.
Okay. Jimba said there. She told me to show you to say the same, but I mean the bunny, Jedin, the Russian, the body, say you about it.
Just a general point to begin with, the mind of enlightenment is a mind, correct? It is accompanied by 2 aspirations. The aspiration that is intent on others' welfare and the aspiration that's intent on enlightenment, right? This is something we must be certain of.
Yeah?
Geshe is always talking about this, isn't he? I mean, we've been unable to develop the 2 aspirations. Oh. If we were able to develop the 2 aspirations, our minds would become minds of enlightenment, right? Our minds are not minds of enlightenment right now because we haven't developed these 2 aspirations.
Oh, that's energy. Jamba, Sutru, Zaba, Senji. So
then the generosity, ethics, patience, joyous effort, meditative stabilization, and wisdom, these are all mental factors or states of mind. They're not minds, they're states of mind.
Understand? Oh,
so generosity, we talk about generosity. Generosity, properly speaking, is a state of mind, a mental factor.
Oh.
We might give some material possession, or give some virtue, or give something like the teachings, yet these are the substances that are given. They're not generosity itself.
Understand?
Generosity itself is really a generous attitude. So to develop generosity, we need to work on developing and increasing our generous attitude.
Understand? To say the power, to say a ginger, tabla, I mean, Jimba don't be paid, I mean, Matumbi, Senda, Yemi,
The methods we can use to help ourselves increase our generous attitude would be to reflect on the benefits of generosity and the drawbacks of not giving or not being generous due to miserliness or stinginess.
Oh.
Yeah? We must reflect on these if we're going to develop a generous attitude.
Okay? Oh. But the doubt about it, I mean, Pigeonal Karisu or Senat, Mundo de Ago, Mushe, Mundo de Ago, Mushe Memala, Mushe John Jilly, Juchene, Timmy Sambo Jimbisto de Dawsene, but the doubt of it.
The glorious Chandakirti spoke about generosity. And what did he say? He said that there is no human pleasure without resources. Seeing that resources come from generosity, Buddha Shakyamuni spoke on this one first. He taught on this as the first of the six perfections. The point is that seeing that was the case, then the Buddha Shakyamuni taught on generosity as the first of the six perfections.
Understand? Six perfections that the Chavatos you so true, you so positive, Chavatos you are that.
Excuse me, Geshe was just pointing out to me that there's a difference between the six, like generosity, and the six perfections, like generosity. And he warned me that later people are going to be debating with you if you keep talking, acting as if it's so easy. So you should know there's a distinction. So what the glorious Chandrakirti said was that there is no human pleasure without resources. Seeing that resources came from giving, and Buddha Shakyamuni taught this as the first among the six.
Understand?
Everyone, no matter who you are, needs to practice generosity. Because it's clear to all of us that if you don't have material resources, then you will not experience pleasure. There's no happiness without if you have no material resources whatsoever, is there? And where do these resources come from? Well, if you talk in terms of cause and effect, they come about due to having been, practiced generosity. So you say, it follows that they do not come from generosity because I gave good money to get that. To which you would have to respond that actually that's not necessarily the case. There's no pervasion to your reason. I mean, the response you'd have to give is, okay, so where did your money come from?
Understand?
We experience a certain pleasure when we make use of and partake of certain material goods. Where did the seed that allows us to experience this pleasure come from? Well, we say that this seed, through which we can experience the pleasure when we use material goods, is a seed of generosity. It comes through having practiced generosity.
Understand?
Geshe oftentimes talks about how, whether it's happiness or suffering, in order to experience it, you must have the substantial cause for it in your continuum. Yeah?
Okay.
You can wear nice clothes, you can eat good food, but the food itself doesn't transform to become pleasure or happiness, does it? The clothes themselves don't transform to become pleasure or happiness, do they? Yeah. They are not the actual seed or substantial cause for pleasure. There must be something else.
Yeah.
It follows that there must be a substantial cause because these things are effects or results. In the external world, fruit and plants and so forth don't grow unless they have a substantial cause, correct? So it stands to reason that the same would be true internally, that without a cause, we wouldn't get the effects. There are even some people who eat delicious food, but don't find that pleasurable. In fact, suffer.
어. 데이터 코를 대윈 열지 좀 많이 봤어요.
So it's very clear that the food itself is not a substantial cause for happiness or pleasure.
그렇지. 대화를 누가래 하고 말해. 어두스래서.
In fact, you don't know if food's going to lead to happiness or suffering, do you?
어두스래서. 진짜 있다 봐도 나와다비. 진짜 나가서 진짜 이나스. 인지 맨지 인민연에 제발라. 인지 맨지 새 잠보다. 아니 배지 꿀로 잠보다. 인지 맨지 착한 거 말해. 진짜 코라. 러와.
어디?
이제 매시 십도 뜻세체. 루델르네니도 좋아고. 대타 기용. 아니 가서고 진짜 또라. 진빈자가 아니 루시아 용거래. 루시아 용거래. 이제 대화 용거래. 인지 맨지 꿀로 잠보 옆에 맞춰.
If that's the case, and our pleasures depend on having material resources, and those material resources depend on having practiced generosity. And you might think, well, in practicing generosity, then certainly you must have at least a good, a positive motivation. I mean, you must do so in a good frame of mind, mustn't you? But the glorious Chandrakirti says, even those whose compassion is small, and who are very rough, that and who are thinking or are working solely for their own sake, that if even those people practice generosity, then the pleasure of material resources comes even to them. Even those whose compassion is small, who are very rough, as in the sense of tough and rude, and who work solely for their own sake. Yeah, if they were to practice generosity, then even they would, even for them, would come the pleasure of material resources. When you hear that this pleasure arises in dependence upon material resources, and to get material resources you must have practiced generosity, you might begin to think, oh, this all sounds a little bit difficult, don't you think? I mean, because surely in order for these things to happen, then you must practice generosity with a good motivation. But Chandrakirti is saying not necessarily, that actually you don't even need a good motivation for that.
Understand?
Some beggar comes along asking for something. You can be angry as you give it to him. That's considered generosity. Those of you, perhaps there's some people who've been to India here, yeah? People, they grab at your clothes, they tug at it, and they say, come on, give me, please, come on, give me. Yeah, and they won't let go until you give. So sometimes you kind of, you get annoyed, but you have to end up giving anyway. In fact, not more than a couple hours ago, Geshe was accosted in New Farm by an old lady who, just as he opened the door, just as he was about to get out, she stood there right there, give me $2. She wasn't going to move. She was blocking his path. She didn't move until Geshe gave her $2. He says, what are you using it for? She wouldn't answer. So it's not just India, eh? Geshe took a look at her and thought, she's probably going to use it for alcohol, but in the end he gave it to her anyway. So.
손지 못 잡아. 렌년다. 아니 또세 그 빼는 거로 와. 근데 좀
Of course, ideally you do give with a positive motivation, right? Because we're talking about the perfection of generosity. Cases in which you are motivated by the mind of enlightenment and use that to increase your generous attitude, right? So ideally, there is a positive motivation for this.
Okay. 어두 때문에 준비 가서 보러. 다만도 세미 왕기 아니 가서 보러. 다 알수지 예다 세니. 이다 생기지 geshe 자고요. 이다 생겨서 갈라고요 하잖아. 이다 투모 많이 믿으면데 결국 또 믿으면데. 그래와. 또 믿으면 다 두두는 세기 문제 믿으면. 같은냐나 루시에 비잖아. 아니 배는 두만지. 디 루시에 디가 루시에 디가 대화 맞죠마체 두마 이제 어떤지 그다 이다 로지 마모셰지요. 근데 이다 어떤도 야 세니님이 또야 요나야. 또 세페 맞죠 봐. 어느 또야 요나야. 다 두두나 또야 요나야. 맞도 받지. 세나 제와이나 어떤지 그. 다 이다 제와라서 어떤지 그야. 맞도 세니님이
Generosity is important for this and other reasons. There are also many drawbacks to being miserly or stingy. For instance, you hear talk about hungry ghosts. A particular type of being known as hungry ghosts are presented in the Buddhist literature, and the suffering that's quite particular to them is the suffering of being hungry. So a common attribute for a hungry ghost would be that they search for sustenance, but they don't end up getting any. They look for food, but they can't find any. And that even if they are able to find some small amount of something to eat, that it ends up making them suffer. So that rather than get pleasure about having finally found something to eat, that in partaking of it, it transforms to actually be an unpleasant experience for them. So this is one of the faults that comes from being stingy or miserly. In short, then, if you have something to give, but you refuse to give it because of your miserliness, then these are the type of things that can happen. So there are many, not just benefits to giving, but there are drawbacks to not giving due to miserliness.
Okay. Yeah. Jimbite maruzu unitane kulu zambuchene. 파주들이야. 편도요. 파주들 편바. 아니 강조 아니 든지리야. 편도전에 아니 정말 준비를 잡아이나 마루 중경마 야지 마진발레자비 무슨 진정 마진발레비 아니 니파 매나야 정가만로서야 아니 마진발레비 니파 사회 든지 요나 어떤 소요 다 발라 아니 준비를 제청벌
When we give, we should try and give in such a way that it helps the other person, right? Or when we are increasing our generous attitude, we try to do so in a way that helps others. 맞춰 세야지. 그래서 셴라 펜바함, 셴라 맞춰 지순바래. 맞춰. 그래요 말이야.
제가 팬데 좀비.
어디. 다다. And so, give with the intention that you're trying to benefit others, or at least when you're trying to increase this generous attitude, think that you are doing so to benefit others. How we might have the seeds of certain faults in our continuum, like, for instance, the fault of having taken something that was not given. Even if you have not taken something which is not given in this lifetime, it's possible that you have within your continuum the seeds of negativities of having taken what was not given in the past. In other words, stealing. So by giving with this positive attitude, we are able to purify the seeds of having taken something that was not given in the past.
Okay?
This holds for increasing our generous attitude as well. So increasing the generous attitude is a very precious thing. By increasing our generous attitude, that becomes like a motivation for then actually giving, doesn't it? This can work as to help spur us on to actually give. And when you turn to actually give, you might give some material resources or your body. You might give roots of virtue. You might give dharma. Or you might give loving kindness. So we talk about 4 types of generosity based on the substance that's given.
Okay.
Scriptures talk about the 4 aspects of generosity. Here they're talking about these 4 types. The giving of material resources, the giving of roots of virtue, the giving of dharma, and the giving of joy, loving kindness.
Okay? What do you say?
Of the different types of generosity, the best type of generosity is the giving of dharma. When making this gift, so to speak, you do so with the intention to help the other person, with the intention to bring happiness to the other person. And this helps to underline why the giving of dharma is considered the best type of generosity. After all, you're giving with the thought to bring happiness to a person. By giving dharma to a person, you give them the means through which they can achieve the best type of happiness. And so the giving of dharma is the best type of generosity. Even though the generosity of giving dharma is considered the best form of generosity, there are times in which it's appropriate, other times in which it's inappropriate. For instance, the person that you're giving it to might be a suitable vessel or unsuited for, a suitable recipient or an unsuitable recipient. Like, for instance, if the person does not want to listen to what you have to say about the Dharma, then your trying to give them the Dharma can actually lead to their performing negativities. So you must be sure that that the person wants to listen to what you have to say, because if the person doesn't want to listen, that person can become frustrated or feel negative about the situation and develop negativity. So, though it is the best form of generosity, there are times in which it's inappropriate. You want to be sure that the person wants to listen. The same could be said for giving material things. If you're going to give some material possession to another person, And you want to, be sure it's someone who's looking for that type of thing. If you were to give it to someone who's, has no interest and doesn't want this type of thing, even they might become, frustrated or feel negative about it, right? So with the giving of Dharma, then the giving of Dharma should be extended towards those people who are searching or striving for such a thing.
Okay? What do you say? Tamando Suzuki Jimba said. Suzuki Jimba said, Kulon Nabataba. Ani Zen Nabataba. Roa. Or Tunjiga. Kulun Naba Sadikandia. Yanchi, Padetena, Malati, Anichi, Deli, Jandajira Iron Sando. Omenachi Mala Deshi Iron, Makeda Chambo Iron. Tunjiga Kulon Meba. Jabaina, Tamando. So you just send you can learn so such a corona pedicle.
In giving of material things, we should be sure that the motivation is pure and that the substance that's given is pure. So take the motivation that in giving a material thing, and you shouldn't think that if I give this, then I'm going to get something in return, or that if I give this, then it's going to, I'm going to become famous, or 데 파트나 츠츠제용 그래. 데 렌. 데 츠츠네 게케라 첨부 차 그래.
말해. 츠츠네 게케라 첨부 차 말아.
데 파트네. 어래.
오늘 게케라 첨부 차 아요산데.
어래.
그래서.
어래. 고. 네. 숨바치 어래. 대시 배치 숨이서 말요. 인곤다. Excuse me. You shouldn't think in the hopes that you're going to get something in return. You shouldn't give in the hopes that through giving you become famous or well known or something like this. So if you are, of the different motivations that you might have for an act of generosity, then the best and main one would be the mind of enlightenment, of course. So we want to have a pure motivation in our generosity. We're talking about practicing the perfection of generosity, aren't we? The perfection of generosity. So our generosity needs to be a perfection of generosities for it to act, or excuse me. So what we're looking for is the perfection of generosity that acts as a cause for achieving enlightenment.
Okay.
And that's why others need to be foremost in your mind when you're giving.
Okay.
It's important that the substance that's given is also pure. So it's inappropriate to give something that you've obtained by fooling and deceiving other people, or that that has been forcefully taken or stolen from other people. Yeah, to give that type of thing is inappropriate.
Okay, well that's the new. Tell us about the religion. Tashi Batalia. Tashi Jimba,
Chigi Jimba.
Chigi Jimba. Munjiba Jimba.
Geta Jimba.
The Nijibanga Mare.
Ori.
Mushe Jimba. Money?
Geta Jimba, Sumbare. Then Chigi Jimba. Jambe Jimba.
Chigi Jimba. Mushe Jimba. I got it. Tandadi Garsa.
상승기 짐바, 지기 짐바, 잠비 짐바, 단 미샤베 짐바 짐바.
문제 버샤지 좀 봐세. 게타 좀 봤잖아. 단다 때려. 좀비 좀 받지봐. 가인잖아. 랑기 개와도 대화자라. 좀 봐. 너도나? 대화도 대봐.
어리.
된다 보지로 와.
어리.
좀봐 검바 걸어. 다 좀비 좀 봐래. 문제 버샤지 좀 봐세 한테. 단다지 가서. 난 알수지. 파초 지발이 셔비 쳤어. 아니 그래서 우리 할람 치지 좀 봤대. 문제비 좀 보이 나래. 그래서 되게 돼서 드디어 소야.
We were talking about the four types of generosity as being generosity of material, or giving of material things, giving of roots of virtue, giving of dharma, and giving of loving kindness, right? Actually, the giving of roots of virtue is actually part of the giving of loving kindness. So this would be when you give the roots of virtue that you gain, that you accumulate, dedicate them to the sake of others. That's actually not a separate category itself, but it's included within the generosity of loving kindness. The fourth type of generosity is actually the generosity of giving protection from fear. But this type of generosity occurs when you act to protect another from their fears or a source of their fears. Considering that, it would seem that the generosity of giving dharma is included within the generosity of giving freedom from fear or protection from fear. Don't you think?
아니 안가르도 롱가 로디강이야 아니 senje든지 롱가 지 모자다 들려 세서 지금은 이제 파지 지 가서로 모자다 들려 저문자다 파지 뭐서는 들어자 두즈지대야 문지바 샤지 비제요
미지바 샤지 짐바티 코르즈 치기 짐바나 디기레 치기 짐바 미샤비
치기 뭐 코르 문지바 샤지 비나
오레 gonda nga tata lai What would be an example of the generosity of giving protection from fear? Well, restaurants will order animals and so forth to kill and then serve as food, right? So if you were to purchase fish so that they did not have to be killed and served in a restaurant, and rather release them, you'd thereby be saving their lives, and this would be an example of giving protection from fear. Or if you're walking along a path a road, and you see that there's a creature that's in danger of being squashed, if it stays there, to then pick it up and carry it off to the side of the road and put it in a safe place would be giving protection from fear. So these types of things are illustrations of that.
Understand?
So the giving to give the dharma to someone with the intention to benefit them is considered the generosity of giving dharma. But we could also say that it's the generosity of giving protection from fear. These two aren't contradictory to one another. They're not exclusive.
Understand?
The scriptures do indeed talk about the generosity of giving the roots of virtue from the 3 times. But they also talk about the generosity of giving loving kindness. If you list the generosity of giving roots of virtue, then you don't need to list the generosity of loving kindness. If you list the generosity of loving kindness, then you don't need to list the generosity of giving roots of virtue, because it's as if the two subsume one another.
Okay.
What is it? It's not as if you could actually physically take your roots of virtue and give them to someone else, is it? It's not generosity in this sense, right? But basically what you're doing in giving the roots of virtue is then using them with the hope that they are going to bring happiness to others. Thinking, may they be happy. We talk about giving and taking. Yeah?
Giving
you might know by the Tibetan name, Tonglen. Yeah? So giving and taking. A giving aspect is a practice of loving kindness.
Oh. Okay. Taking that, 니제고.
Take.
두마랑기 레사 다롱이 이제 두마랑이 뭐를 내야 말이지 이나야. 아니지. 자나 좀 손을 슈첨보지요. 있다. 니제요.
The taking is a practice of compassion, where you taking the suffering of others. And it's not as if you're actually taking the suffering of others physically or anything. Rather, you're developing this very strong thought, may they be free of suffering.
Understand? What the ya goya yarda. Jeje duma rangi lemba chi gonji chi yar. Go with the same ya chi sonu chi koyo gro.
Koyo kare.
Doduna ranjin zu nyembo do icheta. Go.
You do incorporate that kind of aspect into your meditation, though. I mean, there is a meditation that involves this, where you're thinking that you're taking the suffering of others so that you can reduce the degree of your self-cherishing. So you can meditate on this.
Yeah? So, gee, kondi gangla ya. Ani, chindawo ji tuto che de chutulo mewa ji sho da ma da magi jilo ji roba che gu du segin duna. Ta, mazo da de kalsa. Ta duma tung da lego. Ta kalsa guru lemba go ta.
Ore.
Ta jenje na lego.
Let's say that you're really thirsty, and you're just about to take a drink of water. And then someone comes rushing in and says, no, you got to go run down the road. There's someone hurt. You got to go help him. Yeah? So you don't get a chance to drink your water, right? That's when you must meditate on taking the suffering of another. Yes? Here you're taking the suffering at that point. So you continue to experience the suffering of being thirsty because you have to rush off and go help someone else.
Levi nipa chembo ina ya le labo meba roa ndi chigi nenzi ndu di so ya ngado sono mam dongo ya chembo re.
The practice of cherishing others is incredibly potent, but not easy. We need to think about this. These are the kind of points that we need to really reflect on.
Ndi mi nyole ya puchi yona semle ya deshi shibuji ya ta.
If you have a good practice of that type of thing, then your mind would be a very happy one. You might have some unpleasantness and suffering of the body. There might indeed be some physical suffering, but the mind would be incredibly happy. There's something to this. When we go through the different stages of developing these positive states of mind, beginning with equanimity, now we could kind of make an educated guess that there would be that type of happiness when you engender these types of minds, right? After all, as you go through this process, you are covering all the different. You're developing states of mind that suppress or stop the states of mind that create unhappiness and unpleasantness. It's like when you lay bitumen down on a road, right? Once bitumen's been laid down on a road, it becomes a very pleasant road to travel on, right? Because the bitumen kind of suppresses or keeps down all the different things that make an unpleasant road to travel on, all the different things that make you bump around as you go around, all these things that might get stuck in your foot as you walk over it. all the different things that make it unpleasant to travel that road are caught under and suppressed by the bitumen, so it's pleasant to travel along. It's something like this, developing. So once the bitumen's laid, it's a nice easygoing and relaxing road to travel. As we develop equanimity and the recognition all sentient beings have been our mother, we recollect their kindness, we develop the wish to repay their kindness, develop loving kindness and compassion, and a wholehearted resolve of the highest intention in these different things. Then we're laying down this foundation of the mind where all the different kind of bumpy and rocky and unpleasant states of mind are being suppressed. So the mind becomes very easygoing, and a real sense of peace arises. All the other unpleasant things that make things unpleasant have been kind of steamrolled or rolled over.
Isn't it? What the legion has a solo tango. Solo tambaina when it
we need to think about this. And cherishing others is really an amazing thing.
Peace.
The foundation of peace, the root of peace. Really. We wish for peace in the world, but that's very difficult. If you begin to cherish others, then you really begin to develop a sense of peace within yourself.
Okay?
We need to work on developing that. And then once we do, and we become more and more acquainted with that type of mind, then the other practices like generosity and ethics and so forth aren't all that difficult. It becomes much easier to practice these once we have the mind that cherishes others. Think about it. Generosity, that's what we've been talking about, right? Practicing generosity means that you develop your generous attitude. Hey, if you've got the mind of enlightenment and have gone through all these earlier stages, then it's not that difficult to increase your generous attitude. Or think about ethics, for instance. Ethics is mainly about not wishing to harm others, avoiding ill will. So if you go through these different stages, then naturally you're not going to want to hurt others, are you? You're not going to really have ill will. So ethics becomes quite easy.
Yeah. Okay?
So this evening we've talked about generosity. Generosity, the nature of generosity is a generous attitude. And to develop this, we can use the different techniques like reflecting on the benefits of generosity and the drawbacks of miserliness or stinginess.
Neka pena ya puni nepa jina ya karse guru yaran ji zago sa
Ori
neka nena ya puni pepa jina ya de jima jango sa 다 든지 mambushi sono tojosa kato 나도 바빠 mambulo 살다 기타 제르모 제 지빈요라 꼴게 many 가서 조금 mambu도 와
Yours. With generosity, there are some cases where in giving, you might bring some short-term pleasure to a person, but harm them in the long run. Yeah? Well, this kind of generosity we want to avoid. We have to shy away from that type of giving. And there are cases where you might, something might be, hurt a person in the short term, but be beneficial to them in the long run. And that's the type of generosity that we should give. When you investigate more and more, there's all sorts of different doubts that can arise with generosity and what's entailed in actually practicing it. So we need to think a lot about the different aspects and the different things that come along with practicing generosity. Actually, if you look at the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, Lama Tsongkhapa devotes many, many pages to generosity and all the different points that relate to it. So basically, there's a lot of things you have to think about with respect to the practice of generosity, and things that are relevant to individual circumstances. There's also talk of giving one's body. But unless you reach a certain point, then you're not allowed to give your body. Shantideva says this in his text Engaging in the Bodhisattva Deeds. And the Precious Lord Lama Tsongkhapa says this in his text Luanam Chenmo. This body we have is a very special physical support, isn't it? So we can't just, harm it any old time. And if you lack the self-assurance that comes with, of the mind of enlightenment, if you lack a special type of self-assurance, you're not allowed to just give this body away. This is what the scriptures say.
Okay?
So clearly then, things like looking after your health are very important. After generosity comes ethics. We won't have the opportunity to discuss ethics in full this evening, but a little bit about ethics. Generally, the nature of ethics is said to be a guarding attitude, or sometimes we call it the intention to guard. Ethics and guarding. If you have a vow, then clearly guarding the vow is relevant here. Like, for instance, if you promise not to kill, then you must guard yourself so that you don't kill. And this is one type of guarding that's covered within ethics. So one of the types of ethics is the ethics of refraining from faulty behavior. But more generally, we need to guard the mind. To guard the mind from negative states and try and encourage it towards positive states. So generally speaking, the emphasis is actually on guarding the mind.
먼저 당기 반복해 주셔야 돼. 또 말로서 새 들어와서 새 들어와서 새 포지티브쇼로 또야 될 라고요. 네거티브쇼로 먼저 와서.
Which gets back to what Geshe was talking about at the very beginning, taming the mind. Taming the mind means guarding the mind. Guarding the mind from negative states, yeah, and encouraging the positive states.
Okay. 근데 일단 먼저 새 포지티브 쇼 세주 로 다시 잡아라. 다 녀야. 네거티브 세주다 포지티브 세주 좀 제대 먼저 야포 미스 봐. 개천버려서.
In order to direct the mind in a positive way and prevent it from moving in a negative direction, you must first know the difference between negative states of mind and positive states of mind, right? This is something that's very important to be at the start.
Okay? jadi 일단 positive 세주도 negative 세주니 보때 뭐 싶어 제네 다새 아니 컨디션 로드 아니 진이 딱 와라.
Only once you have recognized what negative states and positive states of mind are, can you then begin watching the mind to make sure that it doesn't move in one direction, but it's moving in another, right?
난 네거티브 세주 컨트롤이 나도 야부치 하체 거다래 나도. 아니? 스칼 가보도가.
As for these negative states of mind, well, we probably know that one anger pretty well. The other ones might be a little bit more problematic.
아주 두스레자. 근데 일단 아주 결정으로 샘 아니 샘다 델라 아니지 대 파티 칼로지 되게. 모터 드라이브도 오지라면 돼. 그래서
steering.
세주 그도 제대 아니 세주도 제대 야보지 미스야 개쳐버려자.
You've got the mind, and the states of mind are mental factors that steer the mind, or that, like driving, that drive the mind. The states of mind drive the mind. Very important that we understand the mind, and also these states of mind that drive it.
Okay? 됐어. 근데 이제 아주 조만간도 지도도 착지이야. 아니 세주 때에서 못했잖아.
The next week, Geshe will be talking about ethics, and then together with that, he'll be speaking a bit about states of mind.
Okay? 좋아요. 좋아요.
Do you have any questions? What questions do you have?
With generosity, what's the connection with the intensity of the feeling versus the thing you're actually doing? So if you're feeling very intense, positive thoughts about generosity, say you're just donating 5 cents. So what's the ultimate thing? The intensity carries through to great resources in the future alone, without necessarily being connected to the very small amount that you actually
When with generosity, you've got the intensity of your generous attitude, as well as kind of the magnitude of what you're actually giving. Can if you give just say 5 cents, but you give that with a very intense, generous attitude, can this lead to very great resources or effects in the future? 东森有的话，东森修钱包去，我不切去有呢，等准备在的穷军营内啊，可能是等这部钱包去都谁给的呗？的东森钱包也被忘记。就是。这当然是金巴东呢，可是这部来用的话。因为这部的可能给切中了，可是东山了做了个那个的呗，就金巴在做了那个的。
That's right.
The magnitude of the results we get rely mainly on the generous attitude, not the substance. So your thinking is correct.
그날 저 라마 손동도 있다. 그게 제사.
Richard is probably, asking this question to indicate that Geshe did not neglected to speak on this, yeah. Which indeed is the case. Geshe forgot to speak about this. Yeah.
아주 좋아요. 오늘 단다 눈반이 되지 세 대신에 너는 선제도에 병에 사는 거 봐야 돼. 데려와. 눈반이 되지 세 대신에 샤로라 리치 아니 제가 신체 아니 자세 지셔봐 세아티 제일 로그레 전에 기자요. 자세 지셔봐. 중지심이 시작하래.
There's talk about the giving with the mind of enlightenment. Geshe was just talking about the mind of enlightenment, this mind with the two aspirations, right? So once you develop this mind of aspiration and you're motivated by that mind of enlightenment, thinking that I am going to give in order to achieve enlightenment, and even giving a single grain to a small bird is considered a bodhisattva deed, and is highly, highly praised.
Yeah.
So, yeah. In fact, you'll find that exact statement in Scripture. Giving even a single grain to a small bird motivated by the mind of enlightenment is an incredible bodhisattva, or is considered a bodhisattva deed. Geshe didn't say the most important point, did he? You have any questions? I mean, it's really important that we get a chance to field some questions and answer any that you might have. Geshe is bound to forget something, right? Especially when he's so busy as he is. I mean, Geshe wouldn't say this, but he taught at Chenrezig this morning, and and then we've been running around since 2:00 this afternoon. So it's only after having made this huge circle that we finally arrived here at night. So if you have any questions, please ask Geshe.
Could Geshe please explain what giving the roots of virtue is and what they are?
Could Geshe please explain what giving the roots of virtue are, and or what giving the roots of virtue is, and what the roots of virtue are?
Okay.
Getsa jimbatongya jita. Ani getsa karare.
Shamba goya deya roa. Suyo to dewa to demba shonyon roa.
Ore.
Dewa to dewi jitu demba shonyon. Ani rangi getsa jelia. Pa rangi getsa teacher. Ani jelia. Ani be deshi juwa shonyon. Da de toa go ma deya getsa jimbai. Chikche. Rangi getsa chetu. Rangi getsa tig jeb pachutela dewanjua shonyo. De shambarwa.
Well, it can be explained in two different ways. On the one hand, that you think to give, or you think that first you work hard to accumulate the roots of virtue yourself. So you put in the hard work. You accumulate the roots of virtue. And then you dedicate those roots of virtue with this very strong wish that the result of my roots of virtue be the happiness of others. So this is the giving of loving kindness, isn't it? Because you're giving your roots of virtue you're giving in the sense that you're hoping, or you're thinking very strongly that may your own roots of virtue bear fruit, the fruit of happiness for others.
Oh, one. Yeah, parupolia, Tashi jen, roa, Tashi jen. Ani parupolia gets a shit you. Roa, the chop. Shita Gitawalia, the Chameba, Shadon Meba, Tumi Meba, New York. Or the Jig Tashi Jenny, Paju Gilia, the Jig gets a shesuna, and gets a somebody.
There's another way to explain the giving of roots of virtue, though. That would be that you take certain steps to try and get someone else to, for instance, give or accumulate roots of virtue. So your efforts to get someone else to accumulate roots of virtue themselves would also be the giving of roots of virtue. Generally, roots of virtue are
get a soon said to your the channel should not to move that.
Ori.
That's the G, never. The Poya check the chain. I didn't put you in the form of a
Generally, the scriptures talk about the three roots of virtue. These are non-attachment, non-hatred, and non-delusion. So you do something to encourage another person to give up the incompatible states of attachment, hatred, delusion, yeah, and they go on to do so, giving of roots of virtue.
Okay.
So what should I do?
I've got one more question. How can we equate striking a balance between wanting to be really generous and giving things away, which might work for a while, but then if your life circumstances get then hard again, kind of not regret having done that?
How do we balance the wish to be, to really practice giving things away, but also avoiding the regret that might come after your circumstances have declined? Yeah. 먼저 디 상승기 좀 시비시 땅거 섬네 mambo 때 시기로 와서 대산에 because of penjogi needs the man 냠네 there's a 지부터 해야 돼 같은 겨 시 시기로 와서 내 마요요가 탑시 가려요 그래서 나도 찬용보지 제고 그러 와서
겨와는 잡아 무겨와는 잡아 겨와래.
To regret virtue is non-virtuous. To regret non-virtue is virtuous.
I always 따버리시라고요. 나도 careless 지긴다. 이처럼 지도 따버리시라고. careless 지겨. careless. 정말 또 세한테 또 수세 빼고. 빼줘 정말 가서 또 먹고 소소 빠지고 따기 저거. 따기 좀 가자기 제. 미스터 빈 아시죠?
Geshe is always talking about how people are so careless. You've done that carelessly. You've given carelessly. He talks to the people at Generally Institute about this all the time. Don't be careless. Practicing generosity means to increase your intention to give. As to how much money you actually end up giving, you must look in your pocket to see what's appropriate. Give like Mr. Bean would, counting how much he's got before you give it. Yeah.
Mr. Bean restaurant. Mr. B, this restaurant 어디 가려야?
메뉴.
아니야, 바유노 스페셜 컨셉 기타고요. 아니, 드니 먼저 무슨 뜻이야? 가려했다고요.
Mr. Bean goes to a restaurant, right? And the first thing he does is he looks in his pocket to see how much money he's got, and then after he's worked out how much money he's got, he looks at the menu and looks at the prices and decides what he wants on the basis of what the price is. Yeah.
아주 수문세다. 캐버제구야. 오늘에 만도. 말해서 가서 만원 때 빠제제. 내가 가르쳐놔야 빠제 내보제네. 푸드 차 강가래 빠제 내보제네. 내가 저 괜찮어요.
푸드한차 세야지.
내가
알레오.
내가
안 트레드.
그러와. 강가래야. 손으로 떼떼다네. 내가 제구.
This is quite important. We need to be skillful in the way that we act. That with anything, really investigate or analyze the situation, thinking by acting in this way, what comes about in the short term, what comes about in the long term. Ultimately what becomes of this type of action. Really looking into what we do is very, very important.
Okay. Yep.
I'm quite new, so this is possibly rather a naive question. But I'm very interested in the use of uncontrived. I was at Chinese on the weekend and we talked about uncontrived close placement of mindfulness towards the end of the second day. And also tonight there's been the use of the word uncontrived. And I'm just seeking perhaps clarification so I can put it in the appropriate context.
Sure. you're curious about the term uncontrived, because we used it this weekend with uncontrived close placement of mindfulness. We're using it again tonight, uncontrived mind of enlightenment. So just so you can put it kind of in its proper context, what you'd like a little bit more about this word. Ma saba yinsa, jijina dene this go lawa yinsa des. Chimama yimbe tende de kararesa tenda.
Beso mugoba. Ani jila tshega.
It refers to the arising of something that requires no effort. So, when when you develop something in your continuum to such a point that it requires no effort to arise, that is uncontrived.
We almost really not possible wrong mind, anger, but almost uncontrived anger. Nando control, continue, chepa sabji. Better mugiba nando control sharing.
Although, as Geshe said quite clearly, that the wrong minds like anger aren't actually uncontrived, but we develop them so well that they're almost uncontrived. So that, like, simply by encountering an object of anger, anger arises without effort. Yeah?
Or uncontrived that, also, such a toasan, such a thing, jamba samji, anibe, ji, azi, dumale channel yamba, rujule.
So by simply seeing sentient beings, by simply thinking of sentient beings, the wish, may they be free of suffering, arises without any effort.
Understand? Or the Jidochi. Kalanaji Mishonju say Anichi, Shonju say Galia, Anichi, and the Tanjak Dende, the Tonan Yambikoro, Betsomugoba, Rushuk.
So with the mind. With the mind of enlightenment, then, it would be having the mind, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, arise without requiring any effort. Yeah? It takes a lot of hard work for us to develop it, doesn't it? I mean, if you don't go through all the stages, beginning with the equanimity, through the entire process Geshe outlined, and it doesn't develop very well, does it?
Yeah,
so it's difficult, but at some point.
I think here also I talking. We very important. We normally don't you just say go to the show, Romney, say go you don't touch it. You do my show, you go. You do the other show, Shabbat Gondo, you are. Demons, Samlia. Let them Jordan to
Geshe, oh.
One is Shabago, one in Nijigo, one is Shago, nearly a Tonyo. I didn't my shit to do. Didn't want to get Shavanaji, Tilma, Sonajita Shoda. I mean, Shamba Nijita Ledicala, one is Susandia, George. Did you go? Then, you say.
Geshe thinks he actually mentioned this here before. We act as if sitting there thinking, may I achieve Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings? This is a meditation on the mind of enlightenment. Right? We act as if thinking, may all sentient beings be free of suffering? Is meditation on compassion. Thinking, may all sentient beings be happy? Is a meditation on loving kindness. Yeah, we kind of pass this off as being a meditation on the mind of enlightenment or compassion or loving kindness. But it's very difficult for just sitting there thinking that kind of thing to have an impact on the mind. It's difficult for just sitting there thinking like this. These things we pass off as meditation is being really potent. So if you're going to meditate on loving kindness, compassion, begin with the equanimity. Go through the different stages. Develop the recognition all sentient beings have been one's mother. Develop the recollection of their kindness. Seek to repay their kindness. And go through these different steps. And then, when you turn to meditate on loving kindness or compassion, based upon that, then see the way that it impacts upon your mind. Then see the effect that it has on you.
Okay?
Geshe has probably said this before, but if he hasn't, he just has now.
아니 밤이 새च्या라고. 되는 자라고. 아니 진짜 강가라고 생각와 셴바 이제 전주지 생각가.
The precious Lord Lama Tsongkhapa said when developing or cultivating these things, you begin by focusing on those that are close to you, then on neutral persons, then the enemies, the people that you dislike, and then extend it towards all sentient beings. So when you're cultivating loving kindness, compassion, the mind of enlightenment, all of these, go in this order: friend, neutral, enemy, all sentient beings.
Close to the family,
when we say the people that are close to you, we're talking about your family. Yes. You're always fighting with your family, but you sit there and meditate. Oh, your melting beings be happy. That kind of thing just it doesn't work.
Okay, what is it? Okay. Okay,
so we'll leave it there for this evening.